Yeah, I don't have any slides with notes I need to add in there, but I'll just give you guys a brief introduction before we get into the questions. So for those of you who are familiar with Monterey Park, we have 5 council members, and we rotate being the mayor. So each term is 4 years, and 4 years divided by 5 people, we're mayor for 9.5 months. So I'm actually the newest elected member of the 5 council member council. I got elected in November of 2024. Exactly 1 year before the data center application got onto our plate. And when I came in, because it's an automatic rotation, I came in as mayor pro tem. So after 9.5 months, became mayor, and then a month after I became mayor, this thing comes onto our desk. So everything was very new. But most real estate developers, when they come into a city with a big project like this one, they typically would sit down with each of the council members individually, not together because of the Brown Act, but individually to at least give us an introduction of what their projections are, what their ideal is, what they're wanting to develop in the city. We have quite a bit of economic development happening in Monterey Park right now, but all of the other developers have been sitting down with me to give me an introduction. HMC, which is the Australian company that was proposing this data center, never once reached out to me. So till this day, I've never had a one-on-one meeting with them. And because the minute it was on the agenda, it got taken off calendar due to the timeline that Doug just presented, we never saw a formal presentation on this project. We did get a 7,000-page M&D submission, which we did our best to digest on our own, but till this day has never seen a formal presentation on the HMC project. So it's quite interesting, and I'll give more information as the questions come. But let's start with the questions.
Great, thanks. I feel so lucky that it worked out that she was able to join us. So, precedent setting for this kind of action. I guess one answer to this might have just been like the length of the MND, but was there something specific that made you kind of realize that this was a different animal of a development project?
Yeah, I think we're really appreciative of the community engagement from the residents of the city of Monterey Park. So during my 1 year of council, before the project came before us, we didn't have a lot of residents come to us with issues that, there's a lot of one-offs. They're like, okay, well, our street needs to be fixed, or, this issue. And I think one of the other biggest issues was our Barnes Park pool. We did have a few dozen people come asking us to rebuild the pool. But the minute this project came on our agenda, our entire council room was filled, standing room only. And we ended up having countless council meetings that lasted till midnight, 1 a.m, because we allowed every single person who wanted to say something to come up to the podium and have up to 5 minutes to speak.
Wow, talk about commitment to the civic pride there. Looking back on it, do you think that's really what is necessary to solicit the opinions of the public in a city as diverse as Monterey Park, or was it just sort of because it was the first time you were handling something like this? Is there another way that you think you could pull out the opinions from such a diverse community?
Yeah, absolutely. So council meetings are actually not a good forum for discussion because council, we're not allowed to do back and forth with the community. It's not a Q&A session. So when in November 19th, that was the day that the presentation first came on the agenda. And Council Member Vin Go, he's the council member of District 5, where the project was proposed. We have districts in our city. I'm District 2, he's District 5. He was out of town on that day. So we took that meeting on November, we postponed it for 2 weeks until December 3rd. On December 3rd, we had so many community members come in, but it wasn't a full house yet. I would say maybe less than 100 people showed up. And I had 2 stacks of comment cards in front of me. I would say it was 60% against the data center, 40% for the data center. And this is before any presentation had been done. So this was like the initial gauge of the community. And at that meeting, we realized, okay, there was a lot of, arguments from both sides. So we're like, this is not appropriate for a council meeting. Why don't we ask the developer to host a town hall meeting separate from the council business meeting? We got the developer up, they agreed immediately, and so we again postponed it to the January meeting. Between December 3rd and January 21st, almost 2 entire months where the developer could have done community meetings, town hall meetings, addressed everyone's concerns in detail, they did nothing. They didn't host a single meeting. So come January 21st at the council meeting, we were so disappointed. And the fear, the anger from the community had boiled during those 2 months. And we were, in the beginning, I was actually pretty neutral. I had nothing against data centers. I didn't see their presentation, but I had heard from council in Irvine that they had 15 data centers there, and their city is perfectly fine. No one can even tell a data center in their city from an office building. But because of the lack of engagement from the data center for those 2 months, their excuse was, it's the holidays. In Australia, we close for a month during Christmas and New Year's, lots of justifications. But for us, you just ruined your project.
Yeah, all right, I'll ask one more and we'll turn it over to the group. But obviously, given the way in which the circumstances were handled, I don't think the moratorium is necessarily a horribly surprising conclusion, but for those people who argue like, okay, an all-out prohibition was maybe a bridge too far and you could have achieved similar protections with more stringent regulation, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it is pretty extreme, and there are 1,000, even though it passed with an overwhelming 86%, there is over 1,000 people that voted against no data center because they thought it was too strict. But based on the feedback we were getting at the council meetings from our residents, that's what our residents wanted. Right? I'm here as an elected official to represent my residents, not to put my personal opinion into the mix. And they asked us to do a moratorium, which we did, and then they said, okay, that's not enough. We want council to put an ordinance in place to ban, which we did. And then they said, okay, that's still not enough, because if council puts an ordinance in place, the next council could be bought out by the data center. We have a 2-term limit in Monterey Park. None of us can serve more than 8 years. After the next council members term out and the data center puts some candidates in, they can then reverse the ordinance. So they said, we want a ballot measure. Let the people speak. Well, okay, let's put a ballot measure on. And they campaigned, they door knocked, they fundraised, and they passed it with 86%.
Wow, very cool. Thank you very much for answering my questions. I'm sure other people have questions, both for Doug and Mary Ann. Anyone would like to start? Please.
I have a question for either Doug or the mayor. All businesses have computers these days. Everybody has a server room. So you have anything from maybe 1,000 square feet to 100,000 square feet. 1 million square feet, you have 100 acres. At what point does a data center become something of concern? What's the threshold?
You want to answer that? You want to?
Well, thank you. I mean, and it'll be varying, of course, by the circumstances, because it's analog, right? It could be 1,000 square feet, it could be 50,000 square feet, and it also will depend on the area. If you're out somewhere, let's say, away from urban centers, you have that 15-foot distance, then a very large data center, I think we've heard some of, say, Memphis, or there are certain areas of the country where very large data centers may be perfectly fine even with the, say, water demands. So it depends on the context. It depends on the arrangements, let's say, the data center has for going in. If its energy is drawn from the grid, or there are some that are associated with these battery energy storage or BESS facilities, basically to bring their own power. If there's internalization of the externalities, then it may not matter if it's a 30 megawatt or 300 megawatt. If it's internalizing those impacts, what the community experiences is going to be the touchstone rather than the size or the square footage.
Excuse me, but in the case of Monterey Park, wasn't it specifically defined as like 1 acre or greater, and then the primary use of the building has to be for data centers and network equipment? So if like Caltech put a couple servers in, it wouldn't count as a data center prohibition. But if somebody built a new building that was 1 acre and it was just housing servers, that would be a data center. Wasn't there some kind of threshold like that in the prohibition?
There was, I mean, that does go back to the ordinance, kind of where it started. There was an effort. A ballot measure is such a blunt instrument. It's hard to get these subtleties, but in an ordinance or in kind of legislation at the city council, you can approach the differences between something that's essentially an accessory use, like for a Ralph's or a library or a data center that's associated with a facility like Caltech. That would not necessarily be regarded as a data center that would be under the prohibition because it may be an accessory use. So a lot of those subtleties can get kind of negotiated if it's dealt with in a legislative process where there's kind of give and take and defining. With the ballot measure, it's kind of take it or, it's a one-shot, non-negotiable, as it's written sort of thing. But you're absolutely right. There are certain thresholds that can be set. And I think it was, it might have been 1 million square feet. I forget, but I think it went from the energy usage as opposed to the square footage, but I'd have to look at it again.
This is also something that states are currently trying to figure out, is the number of approaches is frankly staggering. Sometimes they do try to define them by like percentage of power that goes towards like, data, compute, versus sometimes it's like square footage, sometimes it's who owns the data center and what they say it's used for. Unsurprisingly, not a lot of companies are thrilled with that one. So I think it's very much an open question as to what kinds of thresholds will capture what you want to capture for the regulations to be effective without it being unnecessarily burdensome.
I have a clarifier on that same one. So one of the issues that I've understood is challenging for municipalities is how these applications become known. So if it's an existing warehouse building and there's just a business moving in that's going to load in servers, they don't necessarily need a permit to do that. So how do you impose that regulation on, say, a structure that's already built that's just going to be repurposed for this use that doesn't require a planning review or a city council approval? How does that fit into this?
I can do, or go ahead.
Oh, I mean, let's say there's a building. It's a question of the code or how let's assume it's a city code would be written. There can potentially be some notification requirements along with an application of a certain type. There may be some, depending on energy usage, some interaction that needs to be done with the whatever power company. I think Vernon, for instance, has its own power company. There may be some permitting requirements, for instance, with if it's going to be diesel generators, there may be the AQMD is involved. So there are different triggers that can be potentially written in, even if the square footage in the building is already there, the use that it's put to may be tailored and regulated depending on the triggers.
The word that a lot of state legislatures are using are tariffs. So in the event that a utility, they're actually putting the burden on the utility companies and saying in the event that you have a user that's using more than this amount of energy, you need to develop a tariff structure to account for that. I'm not sure what enforcement of that looks like, but because data centers intersect with so many different layers of government, different agencies, it doesn't necessarily all have to be like enshrined in the city's code. There's also opportunities to say like, okay, utility, if you're gonna have somebody plug in a data center, you know, you need to have some kind of mechanism in place there.
I think there was a effort in the legislation, I think that the governor vetoed last session, that was tied to business licensing, for instance. If certain reporting requirements were associated with the business licensing. So there's a lot of steps. I referred to CEQA. CEQA would not apply to business licenses, but there are other steps that are necessary from the government.
If you already have a license, they tie it to the renewal, for example. So there's lots of levers.
Just a quick clarifying question. So on Saturn Lane or Drive, there was already an existing data center that was expanding, or did I hear that?
There was an office building. So the picture that Doug showed in his presentation, that's exactly what it looked like. It's an office building. And they were going to tear it down completely and rebuild.
So you don't have a data center?
No, we don't.
And it seems like, just add an opinion, I suppose, like you said earlier, like Irvine has other sites. Seems like anyone who does have a data center is going underground and doesn't want to let people know that they're a data center. And so now it's kind of hard to showcase like, hey, they exist out there and they're not as scary as people think, but they're like underground now. And no one wants to showcase themselves.
Yeah, I think informing the community is the key. They took me to Vernon for a tour of one of their newest data centers, and when I parked outside in the parking lot, it was quiet. I couldn't hear anything. But once I walked in the building, there were rooms where we needed earplugs because the machines were that loud. But they have a lot of upgrades to technology and requirements for the soundproofing that actually will mitigate a lot of the concerns of the community. But it really requires thorough community informing them and community engagement.
On that note, I don't know, you can't really tell, but it seems like a lot of the part of your story that drove the public opposition was the failures on the part of the developer. How do you think it would have changed things if they had been more proactive, like you were saying, like met with the council, engaged with the public? Like how much of this do you attribute to the anger that the public felt being ignored and disrespected?
I think right now it's all hypotheticals, right? But there is a possibility it could have gone a different way because, like I mentioned in the beginning, I had 2 stacks. There was quite a bit of support before the presentation was even made. And before I even got elected on council in 2024, the prior council and city staff had hosted a series of meetings called the Spark meetings. There were 4 of the meetings. It was broadcasted to the entire city. About 40 to 50 people attended each meeting. And the data center folks were at those meetings as well. They were trying to figure out what to put in that Saturn Park area. Saturn Park is 70 acres and it's owned by multiple different private owners. Data centers was discussed at those Spark meetings from what I heard, and there wasn't any opposition at the time. After 4 meetings where that many community members were involved. So I saw the fire burning and then spread so quickly throughout our city. I think if they had stopped it in the beginning, it could have looked different.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. Please go ahead.
Mine is a technical question, because you're referencing planning. Does Monterey Park have a definition in your land use document for data center? Basic, beginning basic part of when you get your application, how you define it?
Yeah, so in the Monterey Park statute, it's called a data processing facility, and that was an allowable use in Saturn Park. That's why HMC was able to give their application to the council phase, and that's why during the council meetings, not only were we facing hundreds of angry residents, we were also facing HMC's law firm, Shepherd Mullen, who was sending us demand letter after demand letter saying if we ban their data center, which they spent $39 to acquire and had set aside $500 million to build, if they couldn't go through with their project, they were going to spend all their monies on attorney fees to bankrupt the city.
Do we know the developer? Do we know if this was displaced to another community or city in the region? Do we know anything about what's happening?
Not that I know of. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, they can't build in Monterey Park, so now they're going to the Point A Hills Mall to build in the City of Industry. The two projects are completely separate, not attached at all. So HMC, they withdrew their application, which I think was a smart move on their end because they could have spent a lot of money opposing the ballot measure and doing a really strong campaign in our city, which most likely based on survey results, they probably still couldn't have overturned. But if they had done that, the community would have wanted nothing to do with them. If they wanted to convert to housing, to any other purpose, or community would have hated them so much that they would have been, the worst neighbor. So I think by pulling out at that point and saying, okay, let's work together and see what else we can put there, maybe housing, now at least the community is more willing to work together with them, and they'll probably sell it to a housing company because they don't specialize in housing. They're specific to data centers.
All right, everyone, we're gonna do a coffee break, but please join me in giving a round of applause.